to me it's a very critically important city. It's the second largest city in Russia, and to me easily the best.
What sort of a relationship does St. Petersburg have with Moscow?
It's like Sydney and Melbourne. If you're talking about the people, it's exactly like Sydney and Melbourne. And we'd say, he's from Melbourne and vice versa. And Moscow sees St. Petersburg as very arty-farty cultural people, which is true, or snobs. And St. Petersburg see Muscovites like Sydneyites, just crazy, hell-bent people with no culture, and so on. As a Melbourne person or Melbourneite would think about a Sydneyite, so a Sydney-sider. I'm calling them Sydneyites now. I've been gone too long.
Своей нежностью не остынь, через сотню лет, через тысячу. Не покинь меня, не покинь меня, не покинь. Ты любовь моя.
Russians really live life on the edge. They're fast, they live life fast, they love life in the fast lane, and they drive that way, and that's just a happy-go-lucky, in many ways a happy-go-lucky society. And I guess after what they've gone through all these years, here today, gone tomorrow, and they've learned to live like that, so they make the most of what they've got. That's just the way they live, which can be fun but can exhaust you as well.
They've been shaped by what they've gone through, or were they always like that? Have they always had those elements of happy-go-lucky and living fast and enjoying each day?
Well, of course I've only been here since '94. My wife is Russian, but if you talk to people, some of the older generation, I guess they've always been like that. But even before Soviet times, it's that kind of a country. But it's just the nature of the people. It's what makes it very exciting for us as foreigners, as they affectionately call us. But that's what makes it exciting. There's a burnout factor as well. I mean, you burn out after a while, I've got to tell you. You've got to take a break.
Yeah, a lot of expats find that today.
Yeah, I mean, the average expats that come here will do a 2 or 3 year stint, and they'll tend to move on to somewhere that's a bit slower for a while. And those of us that stay, of course, you learn to pace yourself in the system. That's the Yusupov Palace, which is where Rasputin was murdered in the basement, and they threw his body into this canal here, and it ran down the river. The famous Rasputin.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was owned by the Count Yusupov family, and Felix is the famous member of the Yusupov dynasty, and they lured him down to the basement and tried to poison him, and they stabbed him, etc., and he refused to die.
That's right, he just...
And they threw him into the river basically half dead.
Yeah.
But not dead. And they found his body down yonder. And that's because at that time he was the guru to the Tsarina, Alexander II's wife.
I was born near St. Petersburg, which was Leningrad at that time, in a place called Viritsa. This is 60 kilometers from St. Petersburg, and I grew up there and moved to St. Petersburg when I entered the university.
You worked with Garry and got to know him obviously at Coke, and then afterwards, I'll let you
He was my manager.
He was your manager?
He still is.
Yeah, oh, is that right?
Well, to the point.
Don't women run Russia?
Well, that's his opinion.
Well, is that true?
Well, I think so, probably.
How did you get to know Garry and Marina Wilson?
Garry Wilson, as a matter of fact, was the manager who hired me in Coca-Cola St. Petersburg. He was general manager at that time, and I was hired as personal assistant to operations manager, and Garry was the general manager at that time. That's how we got to know one another. Then Marina came as an HR manager. There was a certain break in our business relations because Garry left Coca-Cola and I stayed there, and then I left Coca-Cola and I worked for other enterprises, and Garry got this job in this confectionery holding, and suddenly, really very suddenly for me, he called saying, "Would you work for me?"
Well, Coke was the greatest employer in terms that they train people, teach people a lot. I mean, they employed me as the HR manager, but I was really surprised when I got this job offer. I never felt that I was qualified, but they gave you the opportunity to learn and work at the same time. And the company invested a lot into your training. And for me, it was my major university, probably.
This is the Coca-Cola plant where I started my life in Russia. When we opened this up, there was nothing here. There was marshlands. We developed all the power, the electricity, the gas, all the water, all the infrastructure we put in here. There was nothing here. Now there's Gillette's, Wrigley's.
What characteristics do you admire about Garry?
Listen, he is my general manager.
Don't worry, he's not going to see this for a long time.
What do I admire? He's a very strong personality. He has a very good sense of business as a whole, if you understand what I mean. He sees the whole picture, not just a small part of it. So he knows what the business is like and how this business is integrated in the whole countries or in the whole field of this business.
He's a great husband. He's a great businessman. He's the father of my kids.
You're building a house out of town. Is that because of? Do you feel you'd rather raise your children where there's a bit more space? Is that a bit of bit of your Australianism coming through?
Totally. I mean, my wife is from the country as well here, so she's used to living in a house as well. Most Russians live in apartments. You know, I grew up in the famous Australian quarter-acre block that Mum and Dad moved us to when we were kids in working-class Sydney. And that's what we were used to, going in the backyard in summer in this little in-ground pool or whatever, or above-ground pool, and kicking around in the garage and push bikes, and that's what we're going to have here. So the kids can go and do the same thing. Yeah, it's exactly that mentality. So I'm bringing a lot of Australia out to Russia and living that kind of lifestyle.
At least in Russia, there was such a movement among the businessmen that they shouldn't forget about people. They should have this human factor in their mind, because if you have no people to work for you, what is your business for? And Garry has this understanding, has this concept. So if he hires somebody and if he trusts the person, if he trusts his employees, then he takes care of them.
Garry said to us, Tanya, that in Russia, women run the country. Is this true?
Well, if we consider that the country consists of families, in most of the families, I would say, at least those families which I know, women would be the head of the family. Probably he is correct.
We were the first national or international company to open in St. Petersburg.
Is that right?
In those days, the man that looked after our investment from the government side was a young Vladimir Putin.
And you would sit down and do business with Vladimir Putin?
Very regularly. But Putin was largely responsible for that project. Absolutely.
What is Putin like as a person?
A very reserved man. What you see on TV is really what he's like. He's very reserved, very inward. Very intelligent man, very smart, very fit. Holds a black belt in karate. You never really get to know the man, I think. It's just he's a very quiet, reserved man. As I said, he was a KGB agent in East Germany, and a lot of the regime now in Moscow is part of his contingent. But he's a nice guy. I think he's doing a lot of good stuff for this country. A lot of good things.
Does he have the respect of the people?
Total. Originally, I had this idea of going into to be a recording engineer, and then I eventually went into sales. That's how I started my sales career, and then I sold records, and then I moved into promotions for a while.
with a particular recording company?
I worked with EMI originally, and then I worked with Sony, which was then CBS Records in Sydney.
Okay.
Many moons ago, though.
Oh, well, I was going to say, if you maybe name a few artists, it might...
Yeah, I was with McCartney's family when they toured Australia in 1976. A bunch of us went to do some work with them, and a lot of people. You know, it's a fascinating time. Bon Scott from AC/DC, who actually grew up near where I grew up, we knew him very well. Unfortunately, he died in 1980, but we knew Bon Scott fairly well.
Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. Nice guy too, by the way. I was brought in because the company was technically bankrupt last year. So I brought a bunch of people in with me, management, from around the CIS, and we're having a good year. So we have turned the company around financially. The company was actually formed of 3 traditional Soviet period companies, each having their own local brand. For an example, one brand in the Urals is called Konfi. The other brand in the Volga is called Volzhanka. Volzhanka is like young Volga lady, so it's named after her. And what we've done is, well, my predecessors did, they formed a new brand called Sladko, which means sweet, as the umbrella brand of the company, a national brand. So what we've done is to build the national brand as well as having the local brands. And it's very much like we did at Coke, and bringing all those kinds of ideas and technologies with us.
Gary, I mean, I know we're here at a time that's probably a bit stressful for you, and there's a lot going on. But then again, you've indicated that there's always a lot going on in Russia.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot going on. I mean, just in a nutshell, what's happening with us right now, we've got a competitive company which is owned by a large bank, as they do in this country, that's trying to basically just take back our plant in Yekaterinburg. So I'm in the middle of a fight right now for a large company owned by a bank to take one of my major companies. It's not going to happen. We're all sort of... This is involved with courts and lawyers and all kinds of stuff, but of course they're bribing judges, and judges can be bribed easily in this country. Very easily. In fact, 3 of the judges in this case are coming up for retirement, so it's pretty obvious a packet of money is, you know... And we're talking like $1 million bribes here. We're talking significant stuff. I mean, the company itself is... Sladko is a $150 million US turnover company. So these are large companies. And there's a lot of risk here. So, and that's Russia, and it really is Russia. I mean, there's something always happening. I mean, you can stand to make a lot of money out of these things, and you could lose it. I mean, after going through these things, you know, Sydney's boring, and I mean that respectfully, but I mean, everything works. You know, you go home, the lights work, power works, buses work, they're on time, and everything else. So one of my concerns is when I do finally make the decision to go, is I'm going to have to manage that.
But will you ever make that decision? Will you go home?
Yeah. I keep saying that. I've said that many times. We were going to do it after we finished with Coke in the Ukraine, but we sort of stayed. Max was born. We'll always have roots here, Richard, because, I mean, the kids are from here as well. 2 of my 3 kids, and my wife's from here. And it's as much as home to me as Sydney. Cheers anyway. Well, welcome to Russia again.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Cheers. And I enjoy it. I mean, this is a beautiful city. I consider myself lucky. I've lived in 2 of the best cities in the world, both on the water, Sydney and St. Petersburg. I love it. I literally love it.